History Channel. Okay. It's good and bad. I'm sure there's some good stuff on there, and you can learn from it. But I think it's imperative that you discern the information that you get anywhere, but especially from the History Channel for yourself, because you got to ask yourself if it was really that new and dangerous and cutting edge. Would it really be on one of the channels that was owned by one of the 6 media corporations?
It's always been a question of mine.
It seems super filtered. So when you look at shows like Ancient Aliens and things like that, discern things like that for yourself, because I was watching the History Channel's episode on the Star Child. They didn't bring up anything, bro. They didn't bring up the DNA part that I just told you. They didn't bring up what you just said. They just right away they showed the skull going to some Hollywood makeup artist and the guy turning it into what he thought it might have looked like. And the guy was actually dope. He was not only just a Hollywood makeup artist. He was like he had a degree, a doctorate, like an orthodontistry or something, and like because he understood the facial structure and everything of like human beings, and that's why he was so good at his job. He turned that into being a makeup artist in Hollywood. Not a makeup artist, but like a designer of like masks and shit. You know what I mean? Anyway, so this other guy who's like the pessimist on the show, not the pessimist, but the skeptic. He's like, oh, well, just because this guy's able to make an alien out of it doesn't mean that it was. And I'm like, man, but you guys didn't talk about none of that shit. They didn't talk about what about the dude? This was crazy. Okay, so bone marrow, when you die, microscopic organisms eat your bone marrow, bro, and there's no bone marrow left. Okay, but on this fucking skull, it has what seems to be bone marrow, but it's different. And it's not eaten by these microscopic organisms. It's there. It's intact. For all that time, 900 years. How?
Right. And they can't explain that.
They can't explain it.
Yeah.
And there's tons of these abnormalities. That's one of them that they can't explain, and nor did they even bring up on that show. That's the part. The point I'm making.
That's
like, well, why didn't you bring that up?
They just omit the parts they can't explain.
Exactly.
And then it's comfortable for them to keep it into the part where they can explain away. Mm-hmm. But history, his story.
Exactly.
So I've been dismissing history for a while now. I told my wife we have to teach our kids our story. So I don't even acknowledge history. When she even says, yeah, they still have to learn the history. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. Because I do have to... I'd put them at a disadvantage if they're in conversations with people and they have no knowledge of what people are referencing, So I do have to teach them a base of American history. But at the same time, I'm ready to teach them our story, and that's the history I want them to look, because history puts a narrative in your head, For Black people, history can be traumatizing because the way they put it as in school, your history starts with slavery. Right. So if that's where your starting point is, that's a fucked up starting point, you know? When that's, as we learn as we get older, that's far from the truth.
For sure.
But that can be the way you see the world, It kind of, I ain't going to say history is the one and only thing that shapes your world, but it can kind of give you your idea of your social standing, you know, to some regard.
Absolutely.
So his story.
History Channel. Bro. Look what it's done to the Black community here in this country, bro.
Yeah.
Kush and Chemtrails, the world's most dangerous podcast.